Okay, welcome back for number 3 in the series of academic reading, deep reading. This is probably going to be the last one. I said that when I did the academic writing series, and then a few more bits came up when people started asking me questions and kind of pushing me to rethink a couple of ideas or to explain them in more detail. So let's see. But at present, this is the last one. And this one's more aimed at postgraduate students or people who are looking to read outside of their discipline, open up into new areas of academia, which is something I've tried to do at various times, both when I've had to do deep reading for my PhD or when I've finished and then gone, right, I'm bored of that and want to move on to something else, which is basically what I do. I don't tend to stay researching and writing about the same thing, although I do write a lot about boxing. But anyway, theoretically wise, I tend to try and push myself, and I get bored reading the same stuff. So I've done this on a few occasions, and I'm right in the middle of it as well. If you've watched the academic writing series, you'll pick up some overlaps with what I say today and what I said in number 6, the series number 6, because I finished writing the first book and I was starting the second, and now I'm quite deep into the second. And the second has taken me into trying to understand the sociology of the emotions and some existential phenomenology. So Sartre and Heidegger and a few other people like that who are relatively notorious for being hard to read and understand. I remember reading this sort of stuff back when I was trying to read this sort of stuff back when I was doing my PhD, and I gave it a good go, and that was it. It was ridiculous. I couldn't really get into it. Whereas now I've broadly speaking made sense out of it. With a bit more time, a little bit less pressure. My job is relatively relaxed. So I'm able to just kind of cut loose and go, right, I'm not going to write for a bit. I'm just going to sit and read for a bit, which is quite nice. I do recognize that a lot of people aren't as comfortable in the workplace as I am, perhaps. But regardless, if you do have that time to sit and read, this video is for you. If you've got the time to take a few months off and properly get into a new area, this video is for you. If you're doing a PhD, this video is probably for you. All of those situations are quite unique for us as academics, in that we get to read at hopefully the avant-garde of a topic deeply for a long time, and deeply immerse ourselves in that reading to the point where we're almost trying to lose ourselves so that we can come out of the maze the other side with a better knowledge. Something that we encourage in our PhD students, especially when they're talking philosophical ideas about research methods. I'm talking mainly here about social science, but I'm a strong believer that all PhD projects, doctors of philosophy, should have philosophical reading within it. It seems like it's the social sciences, my discipline specifically, sociology, which pushes that on our students more, but I think all students should do it. So, and the other side of that, not only philosophical reading, writing, but also social theory more broadly. It should take a deep dive. It should take us getting into the depth of it, especially if you want to trace some of the historical origins of it. And in tracing that process, in understanding where these things came from, the pre-scientific knowledge that it's built upon, I think in doing that, one, you can become, what I'll aim for out of this video is unshakable. I'm going to encourage the process that I'm going to talk about today is hopefully going to make you be able to be unshakable in your knowledge. And then the other one is having that depth of knowledge enables wider, deeper thinking beyond the assumptions that we take for granted within our discipline, which is something that is obviously important, especially if we want to reimagine science, reimagine our discipline, think again about some of the assumptions. So they're the kind of two things that I think can come out of this like real deep dive sort of reading that I'm going to talk about in this last video. So yeah, this notion of becoming unshakable, I'll talk about it towards the end, but as a setup, I talk about this in the book about how, I think I say it in the introduction, sorry, not the introduction, the thank yous, what do you call it? Acknowledgements. Because I mentioned it in terms of what my supervisor did for me was start me on a process of making me unshakable. And what I mean by that is not that I'm always right. In fact, it's the opposite. I'm largely wrong. But the knowledge that I have I'm very confident about it because of doing the deep reading. The knowledge that I don't have, I'm confident about that as well. I know what I don't know. And the knowledge that I'm a bit shakeable on, well, I know that as well, which means that when I go into conversations with people about stuff, I'm happy with the parameters of what I've got and I'm solid on the stuff that I've got. But I'm equally knowledgeable about the stuff that I don't know. And within academia, there's so many terms that get thrown around. And just thinking about some of the stuff that I've been reading around phenomenology and existentialism, some of the terms that are embedded in that, hermeneutics and all the rest of it, it's like, what are these words? It's a complete nonsense until you do the depth of reading to understand where they've come from. And at that time, bringing that knowledge back up with you up onto the more current research, it helps you understand that in a real wide context, a long historical context of, this work is embedded in a Cartesian dualism or whatever, something like that, or these people are trying to move past that by using Heidegger's work on whatever. So the point being, by going into that depth, we're able to come back out of it and have a much more solid notion of where we are and where we've come from. One of my current PhD students has done this extremely well in that when she's followed research in medical sociology, she's followed the research of medical sociology all the way back. And when some of her papers have come back with reviewer comments that are a little bit out of whack, she's like, they're out of whack because they don't seem to understand where this concept has come from in these ways. Now, we have to be careful of not being overly dismissive of some of the reviews, but where the reviewer is wrong or has misunderstood what we're trying to say, that really helps because she's got that basis, that really solid basis of deep reading. So in effect, this video is the reason why you should do all the stuff in the previous two videos. So let me kind of go through that in a little bit more detail though, as to what it is, this deep reading, what you're trying to get out of it, how you know you've gone too far or not far enough. So the first thing when we're going into this stuff, we need to have a reason. What's the point in this stuff? Now, again, if you want to read fiction and just have no point to it other than enjoyment, that's fine, but that's not what we're doing here. So I don't go into reading Sartre, which is horrible to read, without having a real clear plan of what I'm trying to do. And for me, it was trying to understand, it was trying to grasp something about consciousness, which is related to the emotions. I won't get into the details of that, it doesn't matter. But the point was I knew what I was looking for. And I knew why I had to get into it. And it meant that I could be focused and I could target my reading in a sharp way. It meant that I didn't get lost. I didn't get lost in all the kind of the superfluous language, but also the stuff that was important for the analysis, but I'm probably not going to have to rely on. So it keeps a sharp focus. I'm not just reading it, just trying to understand everything. So if I tried to do that, I'd have no chance. It's like, no, I've got a reason for doing this. So the next thing is to remember that when you're doing social theory reading or ontology and epistemology, anything in those sort of kind of philosophical disciplines, it's not a superficial subject. If you think that you're going into this and you're understanding it, you're either a genius or you're wrong. So if you think you're a genius, fine. Again, I've said this in previous videos. Stop listening. You're fine. Go change the world. Most of us aren't geniuses. If you think that you're getting it, it might be because you've oversimplified it. Or you're applying some of your own previous existing knowledge to it and you're interpreting it through that lens, which is making it feel like it's simple, but it's not. Usually when you get into this sort of deep reading, especially on a new topic, especially when you're a PhD student, you won't get it. So that's fine. That's good. It's the same as my kind of thing about, I know I can't write, so that makes me a good writer because I'm aware of that weakness. So know that some of this stuff is going to be quite hard to understand, and that there's going to be times of complete confusion, lack of understanding, and that the whole thing will feel super complex. Right? That's normal. And if you're going into it and you're worried by that or scared of it or think you're not doing it right because of that, just chill because you're bang on. That's how it is for most of us, right? So accept that sort of stuff, wade through it, make your notes. As I said in the last video, make your notes in detail, the first video, make your notes. Give yourself time to think about it, plan it all out at a later date, but keep working through it. A lot of the stuff that you'll read when you do a deep dive, you probably won't put into academic papers. There's no space to be engaging with some of these debates that are 100 or 50 or 400 years old. in an academic paper, usually. So what you're doing it for is background. You probably won't reference them. You may reference them possibly in a PhD thesis, or if you're writing books, you may. So I find going back to some of this old school stuff is quite useful in book writing because it gives that real basis on which you can build. And I've got loads of words, so I can do it. But in papers, you probably won't. But it will give you that solid basis, and it will help you understand all of the newer stuff. And a way I think about it is getting your ducks in a row, getting things organized. Right, this is where this came from. This is the historical origins of this concept. Therefore, I understand how this logically or not fits with this other concept because of its ontological, epistemological assumptions or whatever. The specifics of those details don't matter. Once you get into the depth of them, they'll start to align, and you'll start to see the tensions between these different origins of concepts. So you've gone deep, right? Let's say what that might mean. So I might go, let's talk through what I did with the emotions. I went straight to a book from early 2000s, and I read it and I didn't really get it. So I went back a bit further and I got to the 80s, Norman Denzin's work on the emotions, and I got it. So usually when I go back further, it gets harder, but Denzin wrote in a way which I could work with. And the reason why it helped me get the stuff from the 2000s was it was built on that language. So I had to go back before I could come forward. Denzin's work pushed me even further back. So again, to Sartre and to Heidegger and a few others, and Husserl. At that point, we're at a section where we're basically starting to get into old white dudes who are dead and are kind of famous. So some of you may have heard of Sartre, for example, some maybe even Heidegger. And when we're there, we have to just stop and think for a moment. What am I doing here? And some people, some really nerdy people like me will want to read that stuff because it's cool to read it. Okay, fair enough. It's a little bit like reading fiction at that point. If you want to read it, go and read it if you've got the time. But do we need to read that stuff? Do we need to read the original from, over 100 years ago when we've got all this work that has preceded? And in some places you can make an argument to say, yes, you can. I've constructed an argument which I think I'm pretty happy with. I've got to go back to some of that stuff and it's been useful. But at the same time, I don't think we should be going there without a need to do it. We shouldn't just be, I've got to read that without a reason. So think, is there a reason for me getting into this? Or am I just going to be bogged down in this book that's about 2 inches thick with loads of daft words? Because one of the problems with that is that was written, especially if you're looking at social theory, it was written in a very, very different world. Now, the world we're in now has come from that world over time. So it should be useful, but it's not directly applicable. We have to be very careful of this because what we can end up doing is disappearing down a rabbit hole and paralysis by analysis starts to take over. We're thinking so much that we're not actually getting anything done. We're not writing. We're just thinking about stuff that not necessarily fits. So I think once you get that deep, you need to be able to construct a reason. Once you've got that reason, you want to keep reading, go. Brilliant. Well done. I'm impressed. If you're that person who can keep going and get into stuff from centuries ago, that's great work. Well done. We have to be careful of not getting too obsessed with it. Something to be aware of. This is when I'm talking to nerds, I speak like this, right? Because I don't have to worry about my undergrads going to Sartre for a dissertation, right? That's not going to be an issue. So if you're that sort of person that might, a bit of a perfectionist who goes down in deep, dark corners and like really wants to get into it, just justify it before you go. On balance, I think one of the ways to go is to hit these sort of historically famous people who write often in really bad ways, as I would define it at least, and just probably just go to a book about them, right? I've read some Durkheim. I've read a couple of bits of Durkheim's work, but I tend to read about it because it's a bit dense and some of the ideas are relatively simple and taken into the industry the discipline that I use so well that I kind of get it anyway. So just think through that process a little bit. And then if you need to read them, keep going and keep tracing back. Fair enough, but have a reason. But if not, you want to go and read someone who's read the book, someone who's written the book about the person you want to read. Then I start to think about what I call the golden paper or the golden book. The one which you're like, yes, this is going to help. You have to know if it's golden or not, first off. So is it any good, right? If it's easy, that might be because it's not really going to the depth or not, it's not going into the depth in enough detail. My book, for example, it's a relatively easy read. Does that give you as a lot of information that you could take forward about some of the authors that I use? Not really. I pull it out so that it can be used to go forward. But if you want to, you'd have to go back and read some of those authors yourself. I set that up so you can go further. But Nick Crossley's book, which I mentioned in a previous video, this is cracking and does a real good job of looking at some of the key theories that I like to use. Social body, habit, identity, and desire. And does it really well. And it certainly opens it up as a kind of as a tester almost to get you ready for some of those more challenging ideas. So find that golden book or golden paper. You've got to have read enough to know if that book or that paper is any good, but look for it, find it. Once you've got that, hold on to it, save it, revisit it a number of times. These are the sort of people that you're confident that they've got these ideas in the bag, that they can present them to you in a way which is legible and understandable for you. And that also stops you from fetishizing the originals, right? Some people, a joke when I was doing my PhD was about Norbert Elias, because there was a whole figurational sociology school who were like obsessive about Norbert Elias, probably still are for all I know. And one of the jokes was, if you hadn't read it in the German, you didn't understand it. You know, sort of stuff that you want to go and have a sort out outside the pub after someone said it, but obviously we don't do that. So anyway, don't fetishize the original, especially if you don't have to read it, but do be aware that you might have to read it. So how do you know when you've gone deep enough? That's the key, isn't it? That's the one. And that's probably where we start to leave this. And it's this notion of being unshakable. How do we get to that? Well, it's about having no big questions left, right? When I look at the emotion stuff, I read books on emotion and they don't define what an emotion is. And they just talk about it in this kind of undefined way and maybe give me some types of it, but not a definition of it. So an emotion is love. Okay, right. But what is that? What is it? So for me, it's going into a level where I feel like I've got a real grasp of that topic. There's no bits where I'm left going, I'm not really sure how that works out, or I don't understand how that person links to that person, and they're people that everyone references about this topic. So it's finding those obvious gaps and filling them, making sure that your knowledge is really robust and there aren't obvious contradictions within it. Or if there are contradictions, you've got a way of working past them because you've read enough to figure it out. And what we're looking for at that point, and you can only know this yourself. And if you're a confident person, you have to be careful because you could be overly confident. Or if you're an anxious person or not confident or you doubt your own abilities, you've got to be careful there because you maybe probably know this stuff better than you think you do. But with a fair assessment of that, we're looking for a confidence, which the best way to know this is when you start talking about the topic, there's a poise. You feel confident and you look confident and people can pick that up. And you can present your ideas in a way which is clear, considered, not overly superfluous with language, not using big words for the sake of it, saying what you mean and meaning what you say. That's the end point of good reading. That's the end point of deep reading where you start to become unshakable. And that's what we're looking for. So that's the target in the end. How you get there, once you know that that's the target, how you get there, the previous two videos talked about that in terms of the strategy. But in the end, all this comes down to a real commitment to the reading, a commitment to doing it in not the shallow way that we can when we're doing our undergrads, but a deep way, which is challenging, time-consuming, emotionally draining, and certainly doesn't come naturally to most people. Even if you feel like it's something that comes reasonably well, you can go deeper with it. You can concentrate more. You can get yourself into those ideas better. That's the key of deep academic reading, to come out of it after that process thinking, yeah, I've got this. And if you want to question me on it, that's fine, because I've got it and I know what I've got. And that feeling is what you want when you're a teacher, right? I do this all the time at work and I'm very confident in the stuff that I teach on. That feeling is what you need in your Viva. That feeling is what you need in conferences and when you write papers, so that you're assured Again, you know what you don't know, but you do know what you do know as well. That's what we're after. Okay, I hope that's been a bit useful. Hopefully, to some people, I'll have just told them about what they already do. But to a lot of you, hopefully, and some of my undergrads and PhD students, I'm hoping I've pushed you to think a little bit more about reading than just reading, just looking at a bunch of lines on a bunch of words on a bunch of pages, but actually see it's an active process. It's inherently linked to your understanding. It's inherently linked to being a good writer, a good thinker, and in the end, being a confident presenter who someone looks at and goes, that person knows what they're on about. Not because you've falsed it, not because you've performed it, but because you do, because you've put the reading in. All right. Any questions, send me an email, drop me a note on Twitter. Any comments, tell me why I'm wrong. See you next time.